An increasingly common method of conducting research in the social sciences is using available data sources, ones that were not actually collected by the researchers themselves. In this lecture, we're going to talk about different sources of available data and describe examples of methods in which researchers have used available data sources to understand more about the social world. And we'll close by kind of considering some of the factors that researchers should weigh when they are considering using available data in their own research. So what it means to make use of available data is that you're using data that was produced by another researcher for a study of a different topic than the one that you're considering for your own project. It could also, available data also include those data that were actually not produced for any research purpose at all. And to sort of, as an example of this distinction, you might consider the health and retirement study, which was a large survey study that was conducted by a group of researchers to study the health and retirement of Americans over time. And you can compare that to data like those that are produced through people's interactions on Twitter and on Facebook. And these interactions are actually not necessarily related to research at all. People are not thinking about contributing to research when they interact with these technologies. However, nevertheless, an increasing amount of research is conducted using social media data from platforms like Twitter and Facebook. And the strength of available data, any type of data that researchers might make use of, either research collected by other researchers or research using available data from social media platforms, the strength of available data is their variety, their accessibility. There's relatively few costs to sort of get up and running with many available data sources. And really, researchers are only limited by their own imagination, and that's a really powerful factor and strength of making use of available data, which are becoming more and more common. So we're going to talk a little bit about what some of the different types of available data sources are. We're going to talk about 6 different types of available data sources. You can think about available data as being placed into 6 broad categories. The first are public documents and official records. These might include surveys that are conducted by the Census Bureau every 10 years and then stored in their archives and are made publicly available for researchers to analyze. It can also include private documents that are created by people but were not really intended for public consumption, but yet were made available or were collected by researchers to aid in their analysis. A third source of available data are mass media, stories that are produced by newspapers and magazines, television, radio, and film. All of these are sort of cultural products that can be used to understand more about our social world. Physical materials, including works of art, clothing, household items, and tools, can also be very interesting sources of social science data for understanding culture among people in different societies. Data archives are also an increasingly common source of available data, one that has really become more of a force over the past 20 years. These data archives, such as those by IPUMS, ICPSR, the GSS, these are data archives that are put together by government agencies and different researchers and universities around the world, and these archives make many different available survey data sets and other sources of data available to the public for any researcher to go to that website and download the data. And finally, we'll close with a discussion of big data. Big data have received a lot of attention, and these are data that are not necessarily produced with research in mind, but yet represent a big frontier in social science research. And big data include any sorts of data that are collected through people's interactions with digital technologies and require sophisticated analytic methods because of their size, scope, and variety. So we'll talk about the first of these data sources, which include public documents and official records. This source of available data includes documents that are created by government bodies, by the courts, through requirements of state laws and ordinances. And an example of these public documents or official records include the census data and vital statistics, births and deaths in the United States. All of these events are recorded by government agencies, and researchers can make requests to receive birth and death data for their own research. Census data are actually publicly available in the aggregate for researchers to use to understand more about sort of the locations in which people live, include the characteristics of states, towns, and even more granularly at smaller areas like census tracts. An example of research using public documents and official records was a study conducted by Raj Chetty and his colleagues, in which they analyzed the association between income and life expectancy in the United States over a 14-year period. And what was interesting about the study is that the main sources of data for their analysis included de-identified tax records and death records. So these are sort of data that were produced through by requirements set by government agencies, but they used these data to explore the relationship between income and life expectancy among American adults. And their findings, which are published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, revealed that there was a very strong association between income and longevity, such that higher income was associated with greater longevity, and they found a gap in life expectancy between the richest and poorest Americans. And at sort of the opposite ends of the scale, the richest 1% and the poorest 1%, the gap in life expectancy was 14.6 years. Quite stark findings, which raise a lot of important questions. Private documents are also a source of available data, and private documents include the information that's produced by individuals or organizations about their activities. These data are usually not intended for public consumption. They can include even people's private diaries and letters to close confidants, but they can also include business, personnel, and sales records, including medical records, even things like when people go to the doctor, their information is recorded in an electronic health record. Data collected in electronic health records, claims that are placed by hospitals and doctors can actually be sources of data for social science research. One example of using private documents as a source of available data was a study by Jerome Carabel. We mentioned earlier in the semester his study of The Chosen. He looked at private letters and correspondence between university faculty and administrators to understand how 3 Ivy League colleges, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, developed a system of selective admissions in which he argued led to social exclusion of certain racial and ethnic minority groups, including Asian Americans and Jewish Americans. It's a sort of fascinating use of private documents as sources of social science research data. Mass media also represent a source of available data in social science research. Researchers can analyze newspapers, magazines, televisions, and film to sort of address a variety of issues related to the social world, including how certain issues are framed and discussed, the attention that's drawn to certain social problems. Irving Goffman really developed the concept of framing and did some interesting analyses of magazines and how gender was framed and presented in terms of the stereotypes that are present within magazines in the United States. One example of using mass media as a source of available data for research was a study conducted by Maria Orsini. It was a really interesting study in which she actually collected the transcripts from evening news programs on NBC and ABC. And she collected 197 transcripts from evening news stories on these networks that focused on drug narratives related to the heroin and cocaine epidemics between 2000 and 2015. And she explored kind of the frames that were used to discuss drug narratives, and she explored the predominant frames that were used in news coverage to highlight narratives of drug use. And it was quite an interesting study and an excellent use of mass media as a source of available data. Social science data archives are also becoming more common as a source of data for social science research. Data archives are these websites that are maintained either by government agencies or university systems, and they contain a variety of survey data sets, and they make these available to researchers and the public. Some of the bigger social science data archives that are available to researchers include the General Social Survey Data Explorer, the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research at the University of Michigan, the Roper Center for Public Opinion Research, and IPUMS. All of these are excellent archives of survey data sets that researchers can go to these websites, sort of identify maybe a set of topics that they're interested in studying, and find and look at different available data sources that these archives have made available for public use. My colleague Judith Weissman developed a creative way to use one of these data archives, and she pooled 9 years of data from the National Health Interview Survey between 2006 and 2014. And this is a large national health survey of Americans. And she was interested in disparities in healthcare among people who have serious mental illness. And so she used these national data to sort of explore differences between adults with and without serious psychological distress, an indicator of mental health problems. And she looked at sort of the difficulties that people with psychological distress have in accessing healthcare and some of the daily challenges they face in their day-to-day lives. So this was an interesting, she was familiar with the data that were made available through the government archives on the CDC, and she went to these websites and was able to download the data and use it to do a really kind of creative research study. Finally, big data are kind of a really exciting frontier for social research. Big data refer to large volumes of digital records that people leave behind through their interactions with some of these new technologies, often social media technologies and other platforms that have been developed just in the past 10 years. You can think about Twitter, Facebook, services like Uber that people use on their smartphones. These services, many of which didn't exist more than 15 years ago, are increasingly common today and have billions of users. And every time people use these technologies, they leave behind a digital trail that's kept by the companies. And it can actually, some of these records can actually be used for research. There are certain characteristics of big data sources, and these are sometimes referred to as the 3 V's, as volume, velocity, and variety. Volume refers to the size of these data. What really distinguishes big data sources are that they include millions or even billions of records. You can't really use traditional standard computer software to analyze big data sources. Big data sources require sophisticated computational methods for handling them and also analyzing them. The velocity, another interesting characteristic of big data sources are their velocity. Big data capture activities, social activities in real time, continuously. There's never really a break in data collection. A large longitudinal survey might talk to people once every year or 2 years. Big data sources are captured every second, every millisecond. Over years, there's no break. They're captured continuously and in real time. And that's something that is kind of unique and distinguishing among big data sources. Finally, what's another interesting feature of big data sources are their variety. Data on big data come in many different forms, including postings, tweets, and posts on Twitter and Facebook. People post photos on Instagram, videos on YouTube. People comment on these postings and tweets. So users comment. All of these represent data sources that can be used in research. So the different formats of big data sources are a characteristic of their variety. Kind of an interesting example of using big data for research was an analysis conducted by the computer scientist Todd Schneider, who analyzed the Taxi and Limousine Commission in New York City released 1.1 billion New York City taxi and Uber trips that were placed from 2009 through 2015. So this is a big data source because of its size, and also that it's also its velocity in terms of it's kind of collected in real time, all day, every day for several years. And I think what was really interesting, they highlighted that in New York City, one of the changes over the past 10 years was the rise of Uber and the sort of displacing of traditional taxi rides with Uber rides. And I think what Schneider documented was the rise of Uber over the past 3 and 4 years and the decline of taxi rides. What was interesting is that the rise of Uber was greatest in some of the outer boroughs of New York City, including Brooklyn, where Uber quickly even surpassed traditional taxi rides. Lyft was also increasing in usage among New York City residents as well. So this is a great example of big data. There are certain methodological issues that researchers should take caution with when they're using available data for research. The first is that there can be a lot of time, effort, and ingenuity involved in finding and procuring available data sources. It can take time to find the right available data set to use for your research. It can take a lot of time to format that data and make it clean enough for analysis. And finally, it can really require learning some new techniques for its analysis and handling. So just because you find a data set doesn't necessarily mean that it's so straightforward for how to handle and analyze it. So finding and procuring available data can take a lot of time and effort. You also sometimes have to be creative when you're trying to represent the different variables in your study. Because available data sources are not necessarily designed with your research in mind, you might have to sort of be creative in how you measure some of the different concepts that are present within your research question. And because they might not, certain variables might not be measured exactly maybe how you would have measured them if you were to collect that data yourself. You might have to sort of be creative in how you construct the measures from available data sources. There's also, because you're not collecting the data yourself, that also means you sort of have to think about the quality of those data, and you have to sort of figure out where these data came from, when they were collected, who collected them, and are these really accurate and reliable, honest sort of representations of people. And you sort of have to assess whether the information that you've collected from these available data sources are really representative of a particular social group or organization. You have to assess their quality, assess how much missing data can be a frequent issue with available data sources.